Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to College Football Red Zone, where I take a holistic look at all 138 FBS programs entering the 2026 college football season. And we're now officially inside the top 60, which means we have looked at over half of the FBS teams around the country over the course of the springtime, because these are my post spring rankings. And so, what we're going to get into here today is that we are getting into what's going to be my 59th ranked team in college football entering this season. That is going to be the Kansas Jayhawks, representing the Big 12 once again. Been on a little bit of a run for Big 12 teams. This is the third team in a row from that conference that we are going to talk about. So, pretty excited to go ahead and dive into things here today. And I hope you guys do end up enjoying this iteration of the First Look series. And if you do, make sure you go ahead, hit that like button, as well as hit that subscribe button as well. If you do happen to be brand new to the channel, and with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. And this Kansas football team is led by Lance Leopold, entering his sixth season with the Kansas Jayhawks. And I will say this about Lance Leopold, I think that he's a solid coach. I think he is an okay coach, but he certainly hasn't really elevated this program, right? He's gotten them to the point where they've elevated him, and you thought that this team was going to turn the corner a few years ago, back when Kansas nearly won 10 games in 2023. They went up going 9-4 that season, made it to a bowl game in 2022 as well. First few years, you could see that solid progression from year in and year out. And you felt that Lance Leopold was going to be the guy. But then the last couple of years, it just really hasn't clicked fully. I mean, they've dealt with some injuries, and that was an issue for them last year. Because in 2024, even though they missed out on a bowl game, they did end up winning at least three of their last four games. And then in 2025, this last season, once again, they did end up going 5-7, but getting there in a different way. They dropped their last three games, and so they missed out on bowl eligibility yet again. So this time, their quarterback, Jalen Daniels, he's no longer going to be with the program because he did leave to go and try his hand at getting onto an NFL roster. And he's also going to not have interior offensive linemen. Multiple offensive line guys did end up entering the NFL draft as well. They were top 300 prospects as at the time that they were going to go forth and go for that professional career when the NFL draft happens. So, you're losing your quarterback, and you're definitely losing multiple offensive linemen, which I think is going to be the biggest questions for this team from a roster standpoint entering this season. And so, with that being said, how do you address that quarterback position? And then how do you address that offensive line as well? Well, they did at least try to address the quarterback position. Chase Jenkins does end up coming in. He transfers in from Rice this upcoming season. And yes, Chase Jenkins, he didn't throw the ball a ton, but you got to keep in mind, he was playing in a triple option style system at Rice that was implemented by Scott Abel when he made the transition from Davidson to Rice when he took that Rice head coaching job. So now going into a little bit more of a quote unquote traditional offensive system where the quarterback is going to be expected to pass the ball a decent number of times, and so it's going to be interesting to see what does Chase Jenkins look like as a passer, because we know that he's an incredibly athletic football player going into this season, and did have some nice moments in Scott Abel's system. He had 14 touchdowns last year between passing and running the football. So, Chase Jenkins is a talented player. I'm just curious to see what he looks like in a traditional system in the sense, right? So I'm curious about that. But the bigger thing that I'm worried about right now as well is the offensive trenches. I mean, you lose two NFL caliber offensive linemen, and I didn't really love how they kind of backfilled in the transfer portal. The only person of note, and I'm talking person to note when I say that, it's guys that have production at their last stop. Trezell Jenkins Jr., who is an interior offensive lineman as well, so he's going to be plugged in at either left guard or right guard going into this year. Starting potential, does absolutely have starting potential based off of what I read going into spring ball for sure. But he transfers from Wayne State, and that's not even a Division I program. I believe that they're Division II. So that is something to keep in mind. That is quite the jump for Division Two. Does have the capability to start. But even then, I mean, again, you're losing multiple NFL caliber offensive linemen. So the offensive trenches, I think, is going to be the biggest concern more than anything. But let's say that Chase Jenkins does have time to throw the football in and has some time in the pocket to make some good plays this upcoming season. Well, I will at least say this. I think that Chase Jenkins is going to have some weapons to work with because I do like what they brought in the transfer portal from a offensive weaponry perspective. For example, I think that this team is going to have some depth at the running back position. Yasin Willis comes in from Syracuse with 600 yards and 4 touchdowns in the 2025 campaign, and I expect him to be that, I guess, top running back in this Kansas backfield going into this season. But don't sleep on Jalen Dupree either, who transfers in from Colorado State as well. Solid football player in his own right. He had over almost 600 yards too. And what was a tough year for the Colorado State Rams, but Jalen Dupree was someone that was a little bit of a bright spot in what was a really tough year for the Rams, one that led to a regime change out there in Colorado for that Colorado State Rams football team. So I think there's going to be some depth that they're going to be able to work with in the backfield. So you can have a little bit of thunder and lightning if you wanted to go down that road. And then a couple of weapons that he's going to be able to throw the ball to out on the perimeter too. Whether it's Nick McMillan from Buffalo, who had nearly 1,000 yards, even though the quarterback play was pretty inconsistent for the Buffalo Bulls football program last year. And they would be like the first to like to tell you that for if you're a Buffalo fan and watching this video, right? So Nick McMillan, I think, is going to do pretty well now, being paired with a little bit more of a proven quarterback. Don't know how much more proven because again, Chase Jenkins is coming from a triple option system, so that is going to be a little bit of a question in its own right. But at least I've seen Chase Jenkins start and did fine at Rice last year, right? So at least there's that. Tight end, Jalen Butler from Old Dominion, someone to definitely watch out for as well. Butler is going to be somebody that I think could potentially crack the starting lineup as well. The Monarchs tight end was a pretty nice weapon for Colton Joseph last year. It is kind of a do-it-all type of tight end coming into this year. So I think Jalen Butler can be a name to watch out for too, and someone that could thrive in Lance Leopold's office should he be able to stay healthy. And then, of course, in the defensive front seven, I think this defensive front seven, I think you could safely say has upgraded over the course of the past season. You know, they brought in multiple interior defensive linemen in Eamon Smalls from UAB, who had over 50 tackles as an interior defensive lineman. So someone that was consistently able to make plays and was a bright spot in a UAB defense that was just downright ugly, but it wasn't because of Eamon Smalls by any means. He at least tried his best to raise the floor of that UAB defense last year, and I think is going to be a solid addition for the Kansas Jayhawks in 2026 as well. I'm also intrigued by Jabril Conde. Transfers from Grand Valley, one of the best Division II programs in the country. He had 6.5 tackles for loss as an interior defensive lineman. So that's always going to get my attention because those guys in the trenches, especially those interior defensive guys, they're constantly being double teamed so that the edge rushers can tee off on one-on-ones and the linebackers can fill gaps and be the ones that make the play and get the tackle recorded. The interior defensive linemen, man, they are unsung heroes. And so the fact that Connie had 6.5 TFLs as someone that was constantly double teamed, I think that speaks volumes to really the level of impact that he can have on a football game from the defensive trenches. One thing of note here as well, did bring in Jabril Al-Amin from Marshall. He plays that linebacker position. Speaking of those linebackers, and he played some pretty good ball as well. 56 tackles, 5.5 TFLs as a contributor. I think he can make a good contribution for this Kansas defense as well. So if you don't get anything else, I do absolutely think that the front seven for the Kansas Jayhawks defense, I think is going to be an improved unit. And that's certainly going to serve them well when you get into Big 12 conference play too. Did lose Lycan Royals to Arizona State. That's going to be a tough loss to try to swallow in because he had 73 tackles and 7 pass breakups last year. But I thought they backfilled nicely, getting a Corey Gordon from Louisville, and he made some good plays at Louisville as well. Maybe not as productive as Elijah Rawls, but you're getting roughly the same caliber of player there. So, that the safeties and the defensive backfield, I think it's going to be a push for me. I think the secondary is going to be about the same as last year, and whether you view that as a good or bad thing, I'm going to totally leave that up to you. But above all, I think special teams does see a slight improvement going into this fall. Rhino Monteforte is a long snapper from Cal. Did start for the Cal Bears last year. Is going to transfer out to Kansas. So you expect the special teams to slightly improve, which is going to be helpful if Kansas finds themselves in some really close games. Because I mean, special teams may not be a huge component of what decides games. I would say it probably is 10% of the reason that a team wins or loses. But I mean, that's still a contributing factor in what your overall record can be. And Oregon State would be the first to tell you that because they were historically awful at special teams. And it cost them a handful of games because that Oregon State team, if they had even below average special teams work, you're probably looking at Oregon State being a bowl eligible team, for example. So that's what I'm looking at from a roster perspective. I'm worried about the offensive line. That's really the biggest question for me. And then what's Chase Jenkins like as more of a traditional passer? I think he's going to be a really good athlete. Maybe not the same kind of athlete as Jalen Daniels, because Jalen Daniels was very special athletically. Biggest problem for him was that he just had a hard time staying healthy, period. But Chase Jenkins, pretty good athlete in his own right. So I don't think there's going to be a dramatic drop off from an athletic standpoint at the quarterback position. Just what is he like as a passer? Because there isn't a ton of sample to work off of, given the offensive system that he played in at Rice. But offensive weaponry should be good. The defensive front seven should be pretty good, and then there should be a bump in the safeties as well. So what does that really mean from a record perspective? So I will disclose this right off the bat. I'm not super high on the moment on Lance Leopold. I just think that this team is kind of stuck in a gear based on what we've seen the last couple of years. And until further notice, I simply can't be super high on this team, given like maybe some of the questions that I have about this coaching staff at the moment, as well as the fact that they might not be that offensive line could be a liability if they don't properly address losing multiple guys to the NFL through the transfer portal and guys developing internally. And then what's Chase Jenkins like as a passer again? So this is what I have from a record perspective. And I will say this about the Kansas Jayhawks. I think there is a path here where Lance Leopold can get the Kansas Jayhawks back into a bowl game for the first time in the last couple of years. Decent strength of schedule. Their strength of schedule is about in the middle here. They do start off with some pretty interesting games here, though. They do have Missouri and Arizona State early on in the year, and that Arizona State game, that's actually going to be a neutral site game that's going to be happening overseas, which completely disgusting, like to see that, but that is like something that is going to happen. But really, what it comes down to is if they are going to make a bowl game, it's going to come down to four games that happen in the second half of the season. And as you can see on the graphic, Kansas is going to have to win all of those games in order to make that happen. You got Baylor at home. How motivated is Baylor when you get into that second half of the season? Because Dave Aranda right now is on the hot seat. If Baylor gets off to a slow start, do they pull the trigger and get rid of Dave Aranda, and you have an interim head coach in place? I mean, that's something that's definitely going to have to happen here. UCF, you also get them at home, and UCF has its fair share of questions with Scott Frost, and I kind of went more into detail about UCF very recently. I recently revealed them in these rankings. West Virginia. What does West Virginia look like? Year number 2 under Rich Rock. They have a lot of transfers coming in, close to 30 guys coming in from the transfer portal. So what is West Virginia football this late in the year in terms of are they still going to be motivated? And then Oklahoma State on the road. First year under Eric Morris. We know that offense is going to be pretty good. What's Oklahoma State like defensively? I think is going to be the big thing with the Cowboys. So all winnable games for Kansas. But again, if you want to make it to a bowl game, you have to win those 4 games that are all toss-ups. Realistically, I do think they split the toss-up games. I think they go 4-8. So because those step backs, I think it's going to take on the offensive line and a step back from the quarterback position as well. I do think the rest of the roster at least is improved, but because of those two questions, those are two very important positions, and that's probably the two worst places that you could have questions like on your entire football team do, on the quarterback position and the trenches, whether it's on the offensive or the defensive side of football. And that's really where Kansas is at right now. I think that if you're able to keep this nucleus that you brought in together and they stick around a little bit longer, then maybe you could see Kansas make a little bit of a jump in 2027. But I don't think this is the year that they do it. So 4-8 for me, and I do have them again as the 59th ranked team in college football. So, hey, with that being said, guys, I need you guys to do a couple of things for me before we sign off here. First of all, let me know what you think about this Kansas football team going into this year. Am I too high or am I too low? Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown on Kansas football as well, I need you to do me a couple of favors real fast. Hit that like button as well as hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel. But for right now, this is Jake from College Football Red Zone signing off. Hoping you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.